Hey Army, it's Taehyung. I know you're used to seeing me smile through the noise, laugh through the chaos, and turn heartbreak into art without ever numbing it. But tonight, I'm pulling back the curtain a little wider. Not to rewrite history, not to clear my name, but to finally give words to something silence almost destroyed. 5 minutes before the ER turned into a battlefield of alarms and sprinting doctors, Jungkook and I weren't speaking at all. 5 days before that, we were inseparable, two halves of a story no one else knew how to narrate. And 5 weeks before this, silence. Thick, calculated, lethal silence. The kind that convinces you it's protection when really it's a slow-burn poison. It started in the studio. Same four walls, same microphones, same dim LED panels we've stood in front of 1,000 times. But the air, different, heavy. I remember the exact sound of Jungkook's boots against the concrete floor, too fast, too sharp, like punctuation marks carved by frustration. He didn't look at me at first. I didn't look at him either. We both thought we could survive quiet, that if we just focused on the music, the rest would dissolve on its own. We were wrong. He broke first. "You hide behind metaphors, T," he said, voice rough, low, vibrating with a mix of exhaustion and accusation. "You act like you don't feel anything until it explodes in lyrics. Why don't you just say it?" I tried to keep my voice steady. I really did. "Because sometimes words are louder than fists," I replied. That was the spark. He laughed, a short, humorless exhale. "Fists heal faster than betrayal." And that word hung between us like a challenge, betrayal, a confession. A verdict. I felt the impact of it in my chest, not my ears. We hurled truths we never meant to weaponize. He said I was afraid of honesty. I said he was afraid of losing control. He said silence was my armor. I said silence was his prison. Then he got close, too close, eyes burning with that familiar wildfire, the one that once inspired love, not fear. "You think you're protecting everyone by staying quiet," he said, "but you're suffocating the people who need you most." I didn't know if he meant him, or someone else, or all of us. Maybe it was all three. Maybe that's why it hurt so deeply. I stood up, he stood up too. No music was recording anymore, but the fight was louder than any live mic feed. It wasn't physical, not at first. It was emotional combat, invisible but bruising. Then he shoved a chair hard enough for it to screech and topple. The sound ricocheted, my pulse spiked. "Don't make this violent," I said. "It already is," he shot back. "It's just not televised yet." That was the warning we didn't realize we were giving the world. Cut to the ER. The lights were blinding, brutally clinical. I stormed out of the studio that night thinking I could outrun the aftermath. But 5 minutes later, I was in a sterile emergency hallway with my soul still ringing. Jungkook arrived seconds after me. His fist was clenched, not from punching me, but from punching himself internally, regret calcifying into tension. Blood on his knuckles, not mine, never mine, but it told a story anyway. Pain was in the room before doctors even were. I snapped. "Your hands off me," I yelled, voice raw, trembling not with fear but volcanic fury. My scream hit the glass walls of the emergency hallway so violently nurses turned, one dropping a metal tray in shock. Monitors beeped like they sensed danger. Antiseptic hung in the air, but beneath it was something metallic, something emotional, something like fear with a different chemical formula. Then it happened. The moment no teaser trailer could ever prepare you for. I staggered, backwards, like gravity suddenly remembered me, like the emotional debt of silence finally came to collect interest. My knees buckled not from physical weakness but emotional overload so catastrophic it turned corporeal. And just like that I collapsed. Not poetically, not in slow motion, not in a way that protected my pride, but in a way that revealed the cost of everything we never said. "Code Blue, Room 3, the charge nurse screamed, her voice tearing through the hallway like a siren. Doctors sprinted in. Jungkook didn't move. Not even when they shoved past him. Not even when my limp arm fell from the gurney as they wheeled me away. He just stood there breathing like grief had chased him through a marathon he never trained for. The ER erupted around us, but Jungkook remained a statue carved by guilt. Maybe the lights cast sterile shadows across his face, but they couldn't hide the storm behind his eyes. What had he done? What had we both said? 5 minutes ago, we were strangers in silence. 5 days ago, we were constellations. And somewhere between those timelines, a truth cracked open too early without anyone knowing how to stop it. Even Taehyung, who watched us destroy each other with quiet diplomacy for weeks, didn't know how to intervene. Because none of us realized silence had become the villain long before any words or fists were involved. And as I lay there fading into medical urgency, one thing echoed louder than every monitor alarm combined. No one knew how to stop it, not even us. The moment I hit the sliding doors of the emergency wing, where the world suddenly stopped feeling like a stage and more like a verdict. The ER wasn't ready for the aftermath we dragged in with us. No one ever is when silence turns into impact. Jungkook came in right behind me, breath uneven, hair damp from the winter air outside, jaw set like he was bracing for a collision that had already happened. My anger was still ringing in my bloodstream like an overdriven bass line. His regret looked like it was trying to outrun him, but it kept stumbling at his heels. A nurse at the front desk looked up when we entered. Her eyes widened not because we were idols, but because emotional fractures have their own frequency, and trained medical staff can hear it without needing a stethoscope. The antiseptic smell, the fluorescent lighting, the distant wail of a patient in another room, none of it was louder than the tension sparking between us like exposed wiring. I didn't want to look at him, but my peripheral vision betrayed me anyway. You can't erase someone from your emotional landscape just by refusing eye contact. He opened his mouth like he was going to say something, then shut it again, because that's what we did. We swallowed sentences like they were grenades. The silence stretched thin, almost polite, almost controlled until it snapped under its own weight. I felt it before it happened. A cold sweat broke along my spine. My vision tremored slightly like someone nudged the frame rate of reality. Jungkook frowned. "T," he said, voice finally rising above the hush we had been weaponizing for weeks. But concern sometimes arrives too late to stop physics. My legs betrayed me first. A subtle wobble, not dramatic, not choreographed, human. My hand reached for the wall automatically. Cold metal railing met my palm. The temperature shocked me into remembering I was in a hospital, not a metaphor. "Don't," I whispered more to myself than to him. But Jungkook was already moving, stepping closer, instinct stronger than pride. His hand hovered near my elbow, not touching, just offering existence as support. "I'm not here to fight," he said. "I'm here because you look like you're about to." He didn't finish the sentence, because I already was. The collapse hit like a cut no editor could soften. My knees buckled, the world dipped. My shoulder hit the wall, then the floor. The cold tile greeted my cheek like a truth that doesn't ask for consent. The room erupted. "He's down," a resident doctor yelled, sneakers screeching as he pivoted toward me. "Get a gurney now," another voice sharper. "Vitals." My heartbeat was still there, but racing like it was trying to escape narrative consequences. Jungkook stepped back not because he wanted to, but because white coats and urgency shoved him out of the frame. A paramedic dropped beside me, 2 fingers on my neck. "Tacky, too fast. He's burning out," she said. Oxygen mask snapped over my face. Cold plastic, compressed air. My lungs filled like they were being reminded of their job description. The charge nurse barked orders like she was directing the most high-stakes broadcast of her career. "Move him to Bay 3, prep for cardiac workup. Somebody call for attending now." A monitor rolled in. Sticky pads slapped onto my chest. Beep, beep, beep. The kind of rhythm that tells you you're alive but barely. My hearing tunneled, but one sound pierced through. Jungkook's breathing. Not loud, but wrecked. The kind of inhale that shakes your ribs from the outside. I blinked once, twice, vision flickering back like a connection someone kept trying to stabilize. He was standing there, frozen, eyes glassed over not by tears yet, but by the shock of watching someone you love turn pale under lights you can't romanticize anymore. "What happened?" a young nurse asked him. Jungkook didn't answer. Taehyung, who had just arrived sprinting from outside after someone texted "ER now," answered for him. "History happened," he said quietly, and silence collected the bill. Doctors finally intervened between us, not emotionally anymore, clinically. A cardiologist arrived like a man who had outrun sleep for a week. I need a clear path, he said, voice low but commanding. Whoever was arguing in the hallway, you're done. Step back. This is medicine now. Jungkook exhaled shakily and finally looked at me fully as the team rolled me deeper into the emergency maze. His face wasn't fury anymore. It was aftermath. I heard a nurse mutter, "He looks like he ran a marathon in his own head." Someone else whispered back, "He did, they both did." The cardiologist glanced at the monitor and frowned. "He's dehydrated, overloaded, and his heart is sprinting like it doesn't know how to stop." "So stop it," the resident said. The cardiologist shook his head. "You can't command a heart that's been trained to carry other people's emotions for a decade." They started an IV. My veins accepted it reluctantly, like even my body was negotiating terms. The fluid was cold. My skin was warm. Jungkook watched from outside the bay glass, hand braced on the frame, breathing like someone who suddenly remembered silence was never the cure. The resident stepped out and updated him quietly. "We need O negative, now." Jungkook blinked, surprised not by the blood type but by the finality of the request. "I'm O negative," he said. "So is he," Taehyung added. "Then you two just became the most useful people in the building," the nurse replied, already pushing them toward the draw room. As they guided them away, Jungkook turned his head slightly, eyes lingering toward the emergency bay where my still body lay under lights that felt nothing like a spotlight anymore. And in that sterile white silence, a different truth was dawning. Concern sometimes arrives too late to stop gravity, but it can still donate blood to keep someone alive. I came back into awareness not all at once, but in fragments, like someone sliding the saturation back into a drained photograph. The ceiling above me was painfully white, sharp enough to make you believe it could cut. The machines were louder now, persistent beeping, rhythmic but impatient, like a metronome that didn't sign up to carry emotions but had no choice. My chest felt tight, not from impact anymore, but from the aftermath of holding everything in for too long. You ever feel like your heart is running a race your body never agreed to? That was me, right there, breath shallow, thoughts too loud, body too honest. A doctor leaned into my line of sight, eyebrows knitted like someone who had just seen the impossible and was recalculating the math. "He's conscious again," he said, half to the room, half to himself. His voice had that gravelly confidence of someone who spent decades telling people to live. A nurse adjusted the IV line on my arm. The fluid dripped steadily, cold but purposeful, like it was trying to teach my veins how to care again without panicking. My fingers twitched slightly, numb at the tips, sensation rebooting like a system that crashed mid-update. Jungkook wasn't in the room yet, but his presence was everywhere, lingering, heavy, unignorable, not because of anything dramatic he did, but because emotional history leaves fingerprints you can't bleach off tile floors. Taehyung stood at the foot of the bed, arms crossed, not defensive but observational. His eyes were calm but not gentle, more like someone guarding a border no one asked him to guard. "You scared the entire wing," he said quietly, not accusatory, just factual. Which somehow made it worse. "I wasn't trying to," I rasped. My voice was dry, sanded down by adrenaline and medical triage. The nurse handed me a small cup of water, but the oxygen mask still blocked half the gesture. "Sip slowly," she said. "You're not built for sprinting right now." The irony almost made me laugh, but laughter takes diaphragm energy, and mine was offline for maintenance. The cardiologist from earlier stepped in again, flipping through a chart like he was reading emotional telemetry disguised as vitals. His heart rate spiked from stress overload, he said. "No arrhythmia, no structural failure, just emotional redlining." He tapped the chart with 2 fingers. "The heart can take years of performance pressure, but it can't take unresolved personal conflict compressed into silence." He didn't look at Taehyung. He didn't look at me. He looked at the truth between us, like it was a third patient. A resident asked, "So what's the treatment?" The cardiologist exhaled. "Honesty, rest, hydration, and no more emotional suppression marathons." Jungkook finally stepped in at that moment, hoodie pulled low earlier but now pushed back like he wanted to be fully present for once. His hair was a little messier, his eyes a little older. "Honesty," he repeated quietly, almost to himself. The cardiologist nodded. "Yes, but administered gently. Unlike whatever happened 5 minutes before he hit the floor. Jungkook swallowed hard. That physical tell was louder than any scream. He pulled a chair closer and sat down, elbows on his knees, posture folded like a confession waiting for clearance. "You collapsed," he said softly, "right after you yelled at me to keep my hands off you." I looked at him finally, fully. No peripheral vision armor anymore. "I collapsed because silence hit me harder than the fight," I said, "not because of your hands." His eyes flickered like someone punched a bruise he didn't know he had. A nurse stepped closer but didn't interrupt, because some emergencies aren't clinical, they're conversational. "You could have told me sooner," he said. I shook my head slightly. "You wouldn't have listened sooner." That was the moment the room held its breath, not medically anymore, narratively, because that sentence carried more weight than a gurney. Taehyung looked away toward the hallway, giving us space but not privacy, space, not escape. Jungkook's hand moved toward mine, slowly this time, like he was finally asking permission from the moment instead of assuming it. He didn't grab, he didn't hold, he hovered. "Can I?" he asked quietly. "If you're here to speak, yes," I said. "If you're here to protect me from words again, no." His hand dropped slightly, understanding sinking in like contrast, finally returning to a washed-out frame. "I thought silence was safer than truth," he admitted. "It's not," I whispered. "It just hurts quieter, which is more dangerous." He nodded once, gaze steady now, finally letting sincerity take center stage without costume. "Then let's talk," he said, "before your heart collapses again from carrying a story no one else is narrating." A nurse exhaled in relief somewhere behind us, because even medical staff can tell when emotional CPR starts working. I closed my eyes briefly, not from exhaustion this time, but from finally letting the pressure valve hiss open. And in that moment, the ER didn't feel like a stage for panic anymore. It felt like a quiet negotiation table where truth was finally allowed to sit down. The moment after honesty began in the ER, I thought the hardest part was over. That maybe the universe had gotten the drama out of its system. But life isn't structured like a clean narrative arc. Sometimes the climax is just the preface to something heavier, something rawer, something that arrives without knocking. I was still lying there, IV humming cold resolve into my veins, oxygen whispering like artificial wind over my face, when a sharp pain suddenly detonated under my ribs. Not emotional this time. Physical. Brutal. Sudden. A rupture of sensation so violent it yanked the breath right out of my lungs like someone hit pause on oxygen's contract. My body jerked before my brain even processed the signal. My hand shot toward my side instinctively, fingers trembling like they were trying to grab the pain by its throat. The machine spiked into a frenzy. Beeps accelerated into alarm. The monitor wasn't gossiping anymore, it was screaming in telemetry. A nurse snapped upright, eyes sharp, hands faster than thought. "He's crashing," she yelled. "Get the attending now." Jungkook stood so fast his chair skidded backwards, metal legs shrieking against the floor like the ER itself was protesting. I tried to speak, but my voice came out fractured, barely air. "It hurts," I whispered, which felt ridiculous because of course it hurt, but pain demands to be witnessed even when the words are obvious. A paramedic dropped to my side, lifting my shirt slightly at the edge just enough to confirm what reality had already decided to reveal. Blood, darker than metaphor, warmer than panic. Unignorable red blooming outward like ink spreading in water, except this was thicker, heavier, irreversible. "Sure here," the paramedic barked, hands pressed against my ribs, gloves instantly soaked through. The doctor arrived half running, half summoned by crisis gravity. "Internal bleed, possible trauma from impact," he said, already prepping instruments. Jungkook looked stunned. "Impact, he wasn't hit. We were arguing not," the doctor cut him off with a glance sharp enough to sterilize excuses. "The body doesn't differentiate between emotional shock and physical debt if the stress is severe enough. He hit the wall when he collapsed. That was the impact." Jungkook's face went pale in a different way than mine had earlier, because guilt has its own blood pressure. The doctor motioned to a resident. Prep him for emergency imaging and surgical hold. We can't wait." The resident nodded and sprinted for a crash cart. I felt myself slipping again, but this time it wasn't silence or heartbreak pulling me under. It was biology demanding triage. Jungkook leaned closer again, eyes wild but voice low, like he finally understood shouting doesn't stabilize someone who's already falling. "You stay with me," he said quietly, but the paramedics were already rolling the gurney toward the trauma bay deeper in the wing. A nurse physically stepped between us, hands gentle but immovable. "You can't come into the OR, we need space to work." Jungkook's breath hitched. "Then let me do something useful. Take my blood first if you need it. Anything. Just don't let him disappear behind doors again." The nurse blinked, not immune to desperation but trained not to let it steer the vehicle. "Oh, negative," she said. "If you have it, scrub in for donation." "I do," he said instantly. Taehyung stepped forward from behind him. "So do I," the nurse nodded. "Then both of you now." They were ushered away toward the draw room again, but Jungkook twisted his head once more toward me, like his heart refused to fully leave the frame even if his body had to. "Tell him I'm not running this time," he said to Taehyung as they disappeared down the hall. Taehyung didn't look at him. "He already knows," he replied. "He just doesn't know if you'll stay when the truth gets loud." Meanwhile, my body was being rolled into a trauma bay with lights harsher than any stage spotlight I've ever survived. My pulse was weakening, but not gone. My breathing was shallow, but present. And every second that passed felt like a reminder that even if love collapses, concern can still donate oxygen, blood, and motive to keep someone alive. The doctor leaned over me again. "You're fatting. Stay awake if you can." "I can't," I admitted, which was maybe the most honest thing I said all night. He nodded once, not disappointed, just prepared. "Then we do the rest for you." As the gurney turned the corner, Jungkook was already seated in the draw room, sleeve pushed up, needle locked in like punctuation sealing a promise. The ER wasn't chaos anymore. It was choreography, not music, but survival. And me, I was done believing silence was safer than impact. I drifted again between awareness and surrender, but the world around me refused to stay blurred. Trauma has a way of sharpening the edges of reality you once ignored. The trauma bay doors hissed open like airlocks, sealing me into a different universe. One ruled not by lyrics, cameras, or carefully crafted public composure, but by urgent hands and unfiltered human fragility. The doctors weren't panicking because of who I was. They panicked because collapse doesn't care about resumes, legacies, or the size of a fandom. The cardiologist returned first, but now he wore a different expression, one that didn't diagnose emotion anymore but measured consequence. He pointed at the imaging screen, shadows and contrasts of my ribcage glowing like a grayscale battleground. "He's hemorrhaging internally," he said. "Impact from the fall aggravated a vessel near the ribs. We're moving to surgery immediately." No dramatic pause, no teaser silence, just medical inevitability. A nurse began cutting away the side of my shirt, fabric parting like a truth forcibly edited out of the wardrobe department. Cold air kissed my skin, but it wasn't poetic anymore. It was diagnostic. Another nurse pressed gauze tighter against my side, hands shaking only slightly, which told me everything I needed to know. Even trained professionals can't fully mute fear when a life wobbles on the edge of a sentence. Meanwhile, Jungkook was seated under warmer lights but colder tension in the donation room. The blood draw wasn't gentle. It was purposeful, fast, disciplined. His veins delivered without hesitation, like his body wanted to apologize in currency more honest than speech. Taehyung sat beside him, silent but steady, the kind of presence that doesn't compete but refuses to disappear. The nurse overseeing them didn't bother asking about their history anymore. She just labeled the bags, clipped them, and sent them down the hall like dispatch parcels of sincerity. A resident jogged back into my trauma bay holding a radio. "2 units O negative incoming," he said. The cardiologist nodded. "Good, because we're buying him time with borrowed biology now." I remember thinking through the haze. Funny how silence feels noble until your blood becomes the only negotiator left who speaks. They transferred me from the ER bed to the surgical gurney. This one wasn't cold tile anymore, it was padded, braced, ready for war. My hand flopped limply at the edge as they rolled me out. Jungkook saw it through the glass and surged forward, instinct ripping him out of stillness. "Let me see him," he shouted. The nurse blocked his path gently but firmly. "One of you only. We need the other calm and out of the hallway." He looked toward Taehyung. Taehyung nodded. "Go," he said. "He'll want you first when he wakes up." But waking up was no longer a guarantee. It was a prayer tucked inside a scalpel schedule. The OR lights were brighter than any stage KBS or Times Square billboard could ever hope to imitate. My body slid onto the table like someone placing a question mark under interrogation lamps. The anesthesiologist leaned in. "Count backwards from 10, he said. I managed 10, then whispered, "Don't let silence write the discharge summary." He didn't laugh. He didn't need to. He just nodded and placed the mask. The sedative flooded in seconds later, like tidal calm swallowing shoreline noise. Outside, Jungkook finally reached the OR observation window. He didn't sit. He didn't fold. He stood like someone who had just realized love isn't fragile. It just needs witnesses to stay honest. His hand pressed the glass, breath misting faintly against the sterile pane, eyes burning like emotional friction had evolved into motive fuel. A doctor emerged briefly mid-procedure, gloves stained but voice composed. "We stabilized him," he said. "Barely, but he's alive." Jungkook exhaled sharply, leaning his head against the glass. "Barely isn't failure," he whispered. "It's permission to keep going." Taehyung overheard from the hallway, arms still crossed. "Then make sure next time you speak before the fall," he said quietly. Because love was never the cliffhanger. Silence was. And I was done paying interest on it. When the truth stops being personal and starts becoming structural, you realize you're not dealing with a cracked heart anymore. You're dealing with engineered silence, the kind manufactured at scale by people who never cared about the art, only the influence. I didn't see the next events clearly while I was under sedation, but Taehyung did. And if there's one thing you should know about Taehyung, it's this. He observes storms like a historian, not a fan. He doesn't collect details, he catalogs them. The moment Jungkook and he were taken for blood donation again, Taehyung's brother, Jinwoo, appeared carrying a black composite case that looked like it came straight out of an investigation unit that never wanted to be discovered. It wasn't filled with weapons, though. It was filled with something more dangerous, evidence. Jinwoo snapped the case open in a quiet hospital storage corridor. Inside were cassette tapes, handwritten name logs, photocopied contracts, and stacks of receipts that told stories no idle press team could ever sanitize. "You want to know why they panicked when he collapsed?" Jinwoo asked Jungkook without waiting for a reply. "It's not because of your fight. It's because his body was already paying for stress he never disclosed." Jungkook didn't look away this time. He leaned in. "Explain." Jinwoo pulled out a notebook, its pages wrinkled, abused by time and secrecy. "First layer emotional leverage clauses," he said. "Management units used silence as containment, not for the group, for control." Jungkook frowned. "We've been silent before, we survived." "Yeah," Jinwoo said. "But not when silence becomes policy, not when it's enforced, and definitely not when stress gets stored in the body like unpaid debt." Taehyung stood there listening, arms crossed, face calm but eyes sharp like someone reading geopolitics disguised as idle relationships. "Second layer," Jinwoo continued, pulling out a cassette labeled simply, K-Unit DIRECTIVES. "Narrative engineering," he said. "Scripts drafted not for music but for public perception steering. Every time you thought silence was your idea, it was. It was designed." A nurse walked past them at that moment, pushing a cooler toward the OR blood dispatch hatch. She paused briefly, eyes flicking to the case. "This isn't my business," she said quietly, "but if you're planning to expose something bigger than hospital panic, don't do it in the hallway. Do it through the people who still have voices left." Jungkook nodded. "I'm done letting other people narrate consequences." Jinwoo handed him a cassette labeled simply, Fall Impact Reports. These are incident logs of stress collapses in high-pressure performers, he said. Look familiar, Jungkook scanned the label list. He froze when he saw one name highlighted faintly in pencil on a margin, V previous flag. They knew, he whispered. Not just knew, Jinwoo said. They predicted. The cardiologist entered the corridor seconds later. He didn't ask who they were. He asked what they were holding. Are you planning to release something that contradicts the medical incident? Jungkook shook his head. No, we're planning to release something that explains it. The doctor stared at him for a long beat. Then he said, then make sure you don't make it look like medical incompetence. Make it look like emotional consequence intersecting with physical impact, because that's the truth. And truth is the only thing that protects credibility in a war. What war? Jungkook asked. The doctor exhaled, removing his surgical cap slightly. The one the industry starts when a collapse goes viral before context does. Meanwhile, in the OR, the surgeon was already shouting for more O-negative like my blood type had just become a diplomatic lifeline between narrative consequence and biological survival. Scalpel, suction, clamp, he barked. My body was no longer just a patient. It was evidence that silence doesn't stabilize you, it taxes you. Jinwoo packed the case shut again, clasp clicking like punctuation sealing the end of a chapter we never agreed to write quietly anymore. If this goes public, Taehyung said finally, Jim gets dragged too, and he was never supposed to be in the equation. Then we protect him with truth, Jungkook said, not silence. Jinwoo smirked faintly. Welcome to the adult version of the spotlight. Because what none of us realized back then was this. Concern can donate blood, but it can't rewrite narrative without evidence. And love can survive arguments, but it can't survive policies written to contain collapse without context. And if there was ever a moment the world needed to understand that silence isn't safety, that emotional suppression can become physical trauma, and that collapse sometimes happens not from fists but from impact intersections, it was now. Because the story wasn't over. The industry was just preparing its rebuttal. And we were finally holding the original tapes. I opened my eyes again, not like someone waking up from sleep, but like someone re-entering a world that had already drafted a narrative without me. The ICU lights were softer than the ore interrogation lamps, but they still carried that sterile honesty hospitals never bother sugar-coating. The rain was streaking the windows outside, slow, quiet, relentless, like it was trying to remind the universe that even storms don't peak only once. My side was bandaged tight, layers of gauze and tape bracing ribs that had gone through more impact than the world realized. Not impact from fists, impact from collapse, from stress, from gravity, from silence that once disguised itself as diplomacy but had quietly become the villain long before anyone noticed. A nurse adjusted the line on my IV, eyes tired but composed. "Welcome back," she said. "You gave us a good fight in there." I blinked slowly. "I didn't want it to look like a war," I whispered. She smiled faintly. "Sometimes survival looks like one anyway." Taehyung was sitting beside the bed now, finally inside the frame, not outside the glass like earlier. No masks, no internal affairs officers, no boardroom shadows or blood diplomacy logistics, just a man and a truth neither of us could dodge anymore. "You still with us?" he asked quietly. "Yeah," I exhaled, breath finally deeper this time, lungs remembering their job. "Just recalibrating." He leaned back in his chair, arms still crossed but not defensive anymore. That posture had evolved. It wasn't armor, it was history holding a boundary. "Jungkook tried to come in earlier," he said. "They blocked him, standard protocol." "He donated first though, didn't he?" I asked. Taehyung nodded once. "Yeah, no hesitation." A beat passed. The monitor beeped steadily now, calmer, not panicked, not gossiping, just documenting existence like a witness who finally understood the assignment. "Then why does it still feel like he ran away?" I asked softly. Taehyung met my eyes fully for the first time. "Because you remember patterns, not moments." I exhaled slowly, turning my head toward the window where Seoul's winter skyline blurred behind raindrop distortion. Silence created those patterns, I whispered. Not him. Maybe, Taehyung replied. But truth is the only thing that breaks them. At that moment the ICU door clicked open gently. Not stormed, not shoved, just announced by physics, not trauma. Jungkook stepped in slowly, hoodie off, hair damp again, eyes heavier than earlier but clearer too. Not fury, not guilt calcification. Clarity. The kind that finally understands honesty has a softer landing than silence. He pulled a chair and sat down slowly, carefully, like someone who finally realized timing isn't narrative decoration, it's responsibility. You asked me why, he said quietly, so I stayed to answer. My lips twitched faintly. Then answer without metaphors this time. He smirked slightly. You're the metaphor guy, T, not me. Another beat. Then he spoke, voice low but steady, finally occupying space without shaking the walls. I didn't run. I just didn't know how to stay without making it worse. But I'm learning. My heart monitor spiked only slightly, which made the nurse glance over but not intervene, because emotional CPR was finally working on its own. I looked at him, eyes tired but present. Then stay when it matters, not when it collapses. He nodded once. Deal. Taehyung leaned back again, letting silence exit the room like someone escorting a witness who had overstayed its usefulness. Because this time, the ICU didn't feel like a stage for panic anymore. It felt like a negotiation table, where truth was finally allowed to sit without trembling. And if you stayed for the first hour of this story, Army, thank you. Not because you needed to choose sides, but because you held space long enough for silence to finally lose its job and honesty to take over the narrative shift. I'll speak again soon. Next time, no more suppression marathons. No more pattern guilt. No more collapse without context. Just art built from truth, not silence. Thank you for listening to the version of me that finally stopped running from answers.